The siren cut through the morning like a blade. Marcus Reed kept both hands on the steering wheel. The delivery van smelled like fresh cardboard and coffee. His route tablet blinked. 2 more stops before noon. The patrol SUV slid in front of him. Hard stop. A white officer stepped out slow. Heavy boots. Dark glasses. Marcus lowered his window. "Yes, sir?" The officer leaned down. Looked inside the van. Looked at Marcus. "License." Marcus handed it over. The officer stared at the address. "You live on Crest Hill?" "Yes, sir." "That's a gated area." "Yes, sir." A pause. "What are you delivering in a neighborhood like that?" "Packages." The officer's jaw tightened. "You borrow this van?" "It's registered to my company." "Your company?" A small laugh. "Step out." Marcus felt the eyes. A woman across the street stopped watering her lawn. A teenager lifted his phone. Marcus stepped out slowly. The officer circled him. "You people always find creative ways to look legitimate." Silence. The body cam blinked red. Marcus swallowed once. "Officer," he said carefully, "what exactly is the problem?" The officer stepped closer. "The problem," he said quietly, "is I don't believe you belong here." And then he reached for the van door handle. The second siren was louder. Marcus kept his hands where they could be seen. The officer tapped the window. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus stepped out slowly. Cars passed. Slower than normal. "Turn around." Marcus did. "Hands behind your back." "Officer," Marcus said evenly, "am I being detained?" The officer didn't answer. Metal clicked. Cold cuffs tightened. A woman across the street gasped. Marcus felt heat rise in his neck. He breathed once. "Slow." "What is the charge?" Marcus asked. "Suspicion." "Of what?" "Don't push it." Another patrol car arrived. The second officer stepped out, younger, watching carefully. "What's going on?" the second officer asked. "Possible stolen vehicle," the first officer replied. Marcus blinked. "This van is registered to Reed Logistics," Marcus said. The officer smirked. "Convenient name." "It's my company." "Sure it is." The second officer walked around the van. "Plates match dispatch?" he asked. "Running it," the first officer said. Marcus saw neighbors now. Phones raised. Whispers. Humiliation pressed against his ribs. "Officer," Marcus said quietly, "I have delivery deadlines." The first officer leaned closer. "You'll make them. If this isn't stolen. I gave you my license. And I'm looking at it." A pause. "You live on Crest Hill?" "Yes." "Big houses there?" "Yes." "You deliver packages?" "That pay well." Marcus said nothing. "Answer me." "I run a company." The officer's jaw flexed. "Backup confirmed," the radio crackled. The first officer spoke into his shoulder mic. "Possible fraud situation. Individual claims ownership of commercial fleet." "Fraud." Marcus felt something shift. "That's not accurate," he said calmly. The officer ignored him. The second officer approached Marcus. "You on parole?" Marcus stared at him. "No." "Ever been arrested?" "No." "Traffic violations?" "Minor ones. Years ago." The first officer laughed softly. "See." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "Stay steady." A teenage boy across the street called out, "Why are you cuffing him?" The first officer snapped his head toward the boy. "Go inside." The boy didn't move. Marcus felt the cuffs dig deeper. "Officer," Marcus said carefully, "this is unnecessary." The officer leaned close enough that Marcus could smell mint gum. "You don't get to decide that." Silence. The radio crackled again. "Registration valid. Vehicle registered to Reed Logistics LLC." The second officer looked at the first. The first officer didn't react. "LLC," he muttered. "Shell companies exist." Marcus felt the shift again. It wasn't about the van. It wasn't about paperwork. "What more do you need?" Marcus asked. "Proof you're not lying." "I gave you ID." "That doesn't prove ownership." "It proves I'm me." "Does it?" A white SUV pulled up behind the patrol cars. A man stepped out. Well-dressed. Watching. Marcus didn't recognize him. The first officer turned back to Marcus. "I'm going to search the vehicle." "Do you have probable cause?" Marcus asked. The officer's smile thinned. "You're making this harder." "I'm asking a legal question." The second officer shifted uneasily. "Maybe we should." "Pop the back doors," the first officer ordered. Marcus hesitated. The officer stepped forward. Open it. Marcus walked slowly to the rear of the van. His wrists hurt. He couldn't reach the handles properly. Can you remove the cuffs so I can open it? Marcus asked. The officer stared at him. No. A small crowd had formed now. 5 people. Phones out. The well-dressed man spoke quietly into his own phone. Marcus looked at the van. Branded logo on the side. Read logistics. His name. His work. His father's last name. Built from 1 truck. To 12. Now 27. And he was standing in handcuffs in front of it. Last chance, the officer said. Open it or I'll force entry. Marcus looked over his shoulder. For what reason? The officer's voice dropped low. Because I said so. The second officer looked at the first. The crowd got quieter. The well-dressed man stepped closer. Officer, he said calmly, is there a warrant? The first officer turned sharply. Sir, step back. I'm just asking a question. The officer ignored him. Then he reached for his radio again. Requesting tow truck. Possible impound pending further verification. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Impound, he said. Until we sort this out. This is my livelihood. The officer leaned in close again. Then you should have thought about that. Marcus felt something crack inside him. Not anger. Something heavier. The second officer hesitated. You're placing him under arrest? He asked quietly. The first officer didn't look away from Marcus. Yes. Marcus swallowed. For what? He asked. The officer's voice was flat. Failure to provide satisfactory proof of ownership. The cuffs tightened again. Turn around, the officer said. And this time his hand moved toward his belt. The metal door of the patrol SUV shut hard. Marcus stared through the cage. The tow truck was already backing in. His van. His name on the side. A hook slid under the front tire. Officer, Marcus said through the open crack in the window, you have confirmation the vehicle is registered. The first officer didn't look at him. Registration doesn't prove possession. It proves ownership. It proves paperwork. The second officer stood beside the cruiser, arms crossed. Dispatch cleared it, he said quietly. Pending verification, the first officer snapped. The crowd was bigger now. Phones lifted. Whispers turning into commentary. That's Reed Logistics, someone said. I see those vans everywhere. Marcus felt the words float past him like smoke. He leaned forward slightly. I want to call my operations manager. You can make calls at the station, the officer said. This will take 2 minutes. The officer turned. You're not in a position to negotiate. Marcus held his breath. Please. The second officer hesitated. He's cuffed, he said. What's the harm? The first officer stared at him. Then at Marcus. Fine. Speaker only. The cuffs stayed on. The second officer held Marcus's phone near his face. Marcus used voice command. Call Denise. It rang twice. Marcus. Denise's voice was sharp. Alert. I'm being detained. What? Vehicle stop. Crest Hill. They're impounding van 14. Silence. Is this a joke? No. Put the officer on. The first officer folded his arms. I'm not discussing an open investigation with a third party. Denise's voice hardened. Open investigation for what? The officer reached forward and ended the call. That's enough. Marcus felt his pulse climb. You had no right. I have every right. The tow truck lifted the van fully. The logo tilted upward. Reed Logistics. Marcus watched it rise off the ground. Officer, the second cop said low. This is getting attention. I don't care. You should. The well-dressed man stepped forward again. I work with the city procurement office, he said calmly. Those vans deliver municipal contracts. The first officer stiffened. Sir, step back. I'm informing you. Marcus looked at the man carefully. He recognized him now. Budget meetings. Quarterly briefings. Mr. Halpern. You know him? The second officer asked quietly. The man nodded toward Marcus. That's enough. The first officer cut in sharply. Marcus saw it. The flicker. The smallest crack. But it closed fast. The officer opened the cruiser door. Out. Marcus stepped out slowly. You're being transported. For what charge? Obstruction. I have complied. Arguing compliance isn't compliance. The second officer shifted again. Obstruction for asking questions? The first officer's voice sharpened. You want to take over? Silence. Marcus felt the cuffs adjust again. Tighter. A deliberate move. The tow truck pulled away. The van was gone. Look at that, someone in the crowd whispered. They really took it. Marcus stared at the empty curb. It felt unreal. Years of work. Reduced to suspicion. The first officer leaned close. You should have just cooperated. I did. You had attitude. Marcus blinked. What does that mean? It means you didn't act grateful. The words landed heavy. The second officer looked down. Marcus swallowed. Grateful for what? For not making this worse. The patrol SUV door opened again. Get in. Marcus stepped inside. The door slammed. The crowd blurred as they drove. Inside the cruiser, the air felt smaller. The radio crackled. Dispatch to Unit 12, confirm arrest charge. The first officer pressed the mic. Obstruction and pending verification of commercial fraud. Fraud. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Commercial fraud requires evidence, he said quietly. The officer laughed. We'll find it. The second officer stared out the window. Marcus spoke again, steady. You searched nothing. You have nothing. The first officer didn't turn around. Suspicion is enough to begin. To begin what? To dig. They stopped at a red light. A delivery van from his fleet passed in the opposite lane. Driver's eyes widened. Recognition. Shock. The driver reached for his phone. Marcus felt something change. Movement had started. The light turned green. The station came into view. Brick building. Flag in front. The cruiser parked. The first officer stepped out. Remove the cuffs? The second officer asked. Inside. Marcus stepped out slowly. The station doors opened. Two desk officers looked up. What's this? One asked. Possible fraud case, the first officer replied loudly. People inside turned. Marcus felt heat crawl up his spine. He stood tall. Even with cuffs. The well-dressed man's car pulled into the lot behind them. He stepped out again. Phone pressed to his ear. Watching. The first officer paused. Just for a second. Then he pushed the door open. Let's process him. Marcus took one step forward. Then another. The lobby felt colder than outside. And somewhere behind him, another siren echoed. Closer this time. The lobby doors had barely closed when another siren stopped outside. Marcus heard it. Felt it. Not police. Engines. Multiple. The desk officer looked up. What now? Through the glass doors, white delivery vans turned into the station lot. 1, 2, 5. Branded the same. Read logistics. The second officer muttered under his breath. You've got to be kidding me. Marcus said nothing. The first officer kept walking. Processing, he said flatly. Let's move. Outside, doors opened. Drivers stepped out. Men. Women. Different ages. All wearing the same logo. All staring at the station. One of them raised a phone. The well-dressed man stood near them now, speaking quickly. Marcus felt the shift. Not power. Visibility. The desk officer frowned. What is this? Coincidence, the first officer replied. Marcus met his eyes. The officer looked away first. Name, the desk officer asked. Marcus Reed. Occupation. Marcus paused. The first officer answered instead. Delivery driver. Marcus kept his voice steady. Owner. The room quieted slightly. The desk officer looked up. Owner of what? Reed Logistics. The first officer scoffed. Claims to be. The glass doors opened again. An older black man stepped inside slowly. Gray beard. Baseball cap in his hands. He looked at Marcus. Then at the cuffs. He didn't speak. He just pulled out his phone. The first officer pointed. No recording inside. The man didn't lower it. I'm standing on public access, he said calmly. The tension rose. The second officer stepped closer to the first. Maybe we should check corporate records, he murmured. The first officer's jaw tightened. We are checking. The desk officer typed quickly. Keys clacking. Silence pressed in. Outside, more vans arrived. Drivers gathered. No shouting. Just standing. Watching. The desk officer stopped typing. Looked at the screen. Then at Marcus. Then at the first officer. It says here Reed Logistics holds 3 active municipal contracts. The room shifted. The first officer crossed his arms. Database errors happen. The older man with the cap spoke quietly. That database handles city payroll. Silence. The first officer turned toward him sharply. You're interfering. I'm witnessing. The second officer cleared his throat. Sir, maybe we should slow down. The first officer snapped back. You questioning procedure? I'm questioning optics. Marcus watched them carefully. He could feel it. The pressure changing direction. The desk officer continued reading. Registered owner, Marcus Allen Reed. He looked up again. Address matches Crest Hill. The first officer's face flushed slightly. Shell registration doesn't prove daily control. Marcus felt the words hit. Daily control. He spoke softly. I built that company from one van. No one asked for your life story. I'm telling you. The older man stepped closer. I've seen those vans for years, he said. They deliver to my house. The first officer's voice sharpened. Sir, step back or I'll remove you. For what? For interfering. With typing. The second officer inhaled slowly. Outside, a black SUV pulled into the lot. Clean. Corporate. A woman stepped out. Blazer. Tablet in hand. She walked straight toward the doors. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Denise. She entered calmly. Eyes locked on him first. Then on the cuffs. Why is he restrained? She asked. Active investigation, the first officer replied. Of what? Fraud. She blinked once. Fraud involving what? Commercial misrepresentation. Denise looked at the desk computer screen. Then at Marcus. Then at the officer. You do realize he signs the city's delivery contracts personally. Silence. The older man lowered his cap slowly. The second officer swallowed. The first officer's voice dropped. That hasn't been verified. Denise's tone sharpened. It was verified 3 minutes ago. The desk officer nodded faintly. The first officer's posture stiffened. This is still under review. Denise stepped closer. On what basis was he stopped? Suspicion. Of what? The officer hesitated. Marcus felt it. The pause. Thin. Sharp. Outside, cameras were now clearly visible. Not just phones. A news van. The first officer saw it too. His jaw tightened. He turned back toward Marcus. This isn't over. Marcus met his eyes calmly. I didn't think it was. The front doors opened again. A uniformed supervisor stepped in. Sergeant stripes on his sleeve. He looked around once. Then at Marcus. Then at the first officer. What exactly is happening here? The first officer inhaled. Marcus watched carefully. Because whatever came next would decide everything. The sergeant didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What exactly is happening here? He repeated. The first officer straightened. Possible commercial fraud. Subject claimed ownership of fleet vehicle. The sergeant looked at Marcus. Name? Marcus Reed. Owner of Reed Logistics? Yes, sir. The sergeant turned to the desk computer. Status? The desk officer swallowed. Registration valid. Municipal contracts confirmed. Ownership matches ID. Silence. The first officer cleared his throat. We're still verifying operational control. The sergeant looked at him slowly. Operational control? Yes, sir. Anyone can file paperwork. Marcus felt the words scrape across the room. The sergeant turned back to Marcus. Why were you stopped? Routine traffic stop, Marcus said calmly. It escalated. Escalated how? The first officer answered quickly. Subject became argumentative. Marcus kept his voice level. I asked what the problem was. The sergeant's eyes flicked between them. Were you resisting? No, sir. Were you combative? No, sir. The older man with the gray beard spoke from near the door. He wasn't. The first officer snapped. Sir, stay out of this. The sergeant raised a hand. Enough. Silence dropped. Outside, more vans filled the lot. Drivers standing in clusters. No shouting. Just waiting. The sergeant looked through the glass doors. That your people? Marcus hesitated. They work with me. With you? Yes, sir. Denise stepped forward. He founded the company 9 years ago. The sergeant looked at her. And you are? Denise Carter. Operations manager. She held up her tablet. Articles of incorporation. Tax filings. Contract awards. The sergeant took the tablet. Scrolled. The first officer shifted his weight. We're just being thorough. The sergeant's voice cooled. Thorough doesn't mean careless. Marcus felt something ease in his chest. But only slightly. The sergeant handed the tablet back. To my office, he said to the first officer. They stepped aside. Low voices. Sharp whispers. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he could see posture. The first officer's shoulders tight. The sergeant's arms crossed. Outside, a camera crew stepped out of the news van. A reporter adjusted her microphone. Denise leaned close to Marcus. You okay? She whispered. Yes. That's a lie. He gave the smallest nod. His wrist still hurt. The second officer approached quietly. I didn't know, he said under his breath. Marcus looked at him. You didn't ask. The words weren't angry. They were tired. The second officer swallowed. I followed his lead. Marcus nodded once. The sergeant returned. The first officer followed, jaw set. The room felt smaller. Remove the cuffs, the sergeant said. The first officer hesitated. Now. The metal clicked open. Marcus rubbed his wrists slowly. No rush. No sudden movements. The sergeant faced him directly. Mr. Reed, you are not under arrest. I understand. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. Marcus met his eyes. With respect, sir, it did not feel like that. Silence. The sergeant didn't argue. The first officer spoke sharply. We still have concerns about. The sergeant cut him off. Enough. The word landed hard. The desk officer avoided eye contact. Outside, the reporter was now speaking into camera. Marcus could see the red recording light. The sergeant lowered his voice. This will require documentation. Of what? Marcus asked. Of everything. The first officer stiffened. Sir, that's not optional. Marcus felt the shift again. Paper trails. Reports. Internal reviews. The first officer's confidence thinned. But his eyes stayed hard. This isn't over, he muttered. Marcus looked at him steadily. I know. The sergeant turned toward the desk. Notify internal affairs. The room froze. The first officer's head snapped up. For what? For review. Review of what? The sergeant's tone stayed even. Conduct. Outside, the reporter pushed through the doors. Sergeant, can you comment on the detention of a city contractor? Cameras followed her in. The first officer stepped back instinctively. Marcus stood still. The reporter's eyes moved from him to the red marks on his wrists. Sir, she said softly to Marcus, were you detained without cause? Marcus paused, every eye in the room on him. He thought about the van lifted off the ground. The words, you don't belong here. He answered carefully. I was stopped for existing. Silence fell heavy. The sergeant exhaled slowly. The first officer looked at the floor. And outside, more vans were still arriving. The parking lot was full. White vans lined both sides of the station entrance. Logos bright under the noon sun. Reed Logistics. Drivers stood in silence. No signs. No shouting. Just presence. The reporter turned her camera toward them. Why are they here? She asked. Denise answered calmly. They're concerned. Concerned about what? Leadership being detained without cause. Inside, the first officer watched through the glass. His jaw tight. They're staging something, he muttered. The sergeant didn't look at him. They're standing. That's pressure. That's public. Marcus stepped outside slowly. The air felt heavier now. Phones lifted instantly. A murmur passed through the crowd. Boss, you okay? He nodded once. I'm fine. It wasn't fully true. But he was standing. That mattered. The older man with the gray beard approached. You built this? He asked quietly. Yes. From scratch? Yes, sir. The man nodded slowly. Then stand tall. Marcus did. The reporter moved closer. Mr. Reed, how many vehicles are in your fleet? 27 active. And you were detained while operating one? Yes. For what reason? Marcus paused. He chose each word carefully. I was told I did not appear to belong. The sentence hung in the air. The camera zoomed slightly. The first officer stepped outside. That statement is misleading. The reporter turned quickly. Officer, what was the official reason? Routine verification. Routine involves handcuffs? The second officer stepped out behind him. Silence. The first officer's tone sharpened. The subject was uncooperative. Marcus looked at him calmly. I answered every question. You questioned authority. I asked what law I violated. That tone. What tone? Marcus asked evenly. The crowd shifted. Denise stepped beside him. Officer, she said. Your body cam recorded everything. A flicker crossed his face. It records for transparency, he replied. Good, she said softly. The reporter leaned in. Will the footage be released? That's not your decision, the officer snapped. The sergeant stepped outside. That will be reviewed. The word review landed again. Heavy. The well-dressed city official, Mr. Halpern, walked toward the group. Sergeant, he said calmly, Reed Logistics manages 3 municipal delivery routes. I'm aware, the sergeant replied. If their operations are interrupted, the city is impacted. The first officer stiffened. Marcus watched him carefully. The shift was visible now. Authority no longer solid. The reporter turned to Marcus again. Did you identify yourself as owner during the stop? Yes. And? Marcus met the camera briefly. I was told anyone can claim ownership. A ripple passed through the crowd. The older man shook his head slowly. The second officer stared at the ground. The first officer's voice rose slightly. This narrative is being twisted. Marcus kept his tone level. I was placed in cuffs before any verification. That was precaution. For what threat? Silence. The question lingered. The sergeant stepped in. Everyone lower voices. But the moment had already shifted. A driver from the fleet stepped forward. I saw him drive this morning, she said. He checks routes every Friday. Another nodded. He signs our payroll. The first officer looked at them sharply. Return to your vehicles. No one moved. They weren't blocking traffic. They weren't yelling. They were just there. Watching. The reporter's microphone caught everything. Sergeant, she pressed, has Internal Affairs been notified? Yes. The first officer turned. That's premature. The sergeant's tone hardened slightly. It's procedural. Marcus felt a strange calm settle in. Not victory. Not yet. But truth had weight now. The first officer stepped closer to him. Low voice. You think this crowd protects you? Marcus held his gaze. No. Then what? It protects the truth. The officer's jaw flexed. Behind them, a black sedan pulled into the lot. Not city. Not media. Corporate plates. Denise saw it first. She exhaled slowly. Marcus followed her gaze. 2 people stepped out. Dark suits. Folders in hand. They walked with purpose. The sergeant noticed. Who are they? He asked. Denise answered quietly. Legal. The first officer's shoulders tightened. Legal for what? Marcus didn't look away from him. For documentation. The suited pair reached the group. One extended a card to the sergeant. We're here regarding the unlawful detention of our client. Client. The word cut clean. The first officer's expression changed. Not anger. Not confidence. Something else. The first hint of consequence. And the reporter's camera was still recording. The suited woman adjusted her glasses. We represent Mr. Marcus Reed, she said calmly. Founder and sole owner of Reed Logistics. The word founder landed heavier than the others. The first officer folded his arms. He claimed that earlier. She didn't look at him. He didn't need to claim it. It's documented. She handed the sergeant a folder. Inside were contracts. City seals. Signatures. Marcus's name printed clearly across each page. The sergeant flipped through them slowly. The second suited attorney spoke next. Reed Logistics is the primary courier contractor for 3 municipal departments. Interrupting operations without cause exposes the city to liability. Liability. The word shifted the air. The first officer scoffed lightly. No one's operations were interrupted. Marcus spoke quietly. My vehicle was impounded. The sergeant looked up sharply. It was towed. Yes, sir, Marcus answered. The second officer avoided eye contact. The first officer's voice tightened. Temporary hold. For how long? The attorney asked. Until verification. Verification of what? Silence. The attorney's eyes narrowed slightly. Our client was handcuffed in public view. For safety. What safety risk did he present? The first officer hesitated. Marcus watched it happen. The pause. The missing answer. The reporter stepped closer. Officer, did Mr. Reed threaten you? No. Did he resist? He was argumentative. The attorney tilted her head, asking what law he violated. The second officer shifted his weight again. The sergeant exhaled slowly. Let's take this inside. No, the attorney replied gently. Transparency is fine right here. Marcus felt the moment stretching. The crowd silent. Drivers watching. Cameras steady. The first officer's voice dropped lower. You're making this political. The attorney's tone stayed even. No. This is procedural. She gestured toward Marcus. He identified himself as owner. Yes. You ran his ID. Yes. You confirmed vehicle registration. Yes. You handcuffed him anyway. Silence. The sergeant looked at the first officer. Answer. The officer's jaw tightened. I had suspicion. Based on what? The attorney pressed. Marcus could hear his own breathing. Slow. Controlled. The first officer spoke carefully. His presence in a high-value neighborhood raised concern. The words hung there. Sharp. Clear. The reporter didn't blink. Concern based on what factor? She asked. The officer didn't answer. Marcus felt it. The line. Thin. Dangerous. The attorney spoke again. Are you suggesting my client appeared out of place? The officer looked away. The silence answered. The sergeant stepped in. That's enough. The first officer's shoulders were no longer squared. They had dropped slightly. Just enough. The attorney closed her folder. We are formally requesting preservation of all body cam footage. The sergeant nodded once. Granted. The first officer stiffened. That's not necessary. It is, the sergeant replied. Marcus felt the shift fully now. Authority moving. Direction changing. The attorney looked at Marcus. Mr. Reed, do you wish to file a complaint? The question sat heavy. He thought about the cuffs. The crowd. The words. You don't belong here. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. Yes, he said quietly. The first officer looked up sharply. You're really going to do this? Marcus met his eyes. You already did. Silence. The sergeant turned toward the officer. Effective immediately, you are relieved from active duty pending review. The words landed clean. Public. Final. The second officer inhaled sharply. The crowd murmured. The first officer stared at the sergeant. You're suspending me? For doing my job. For failing to justify it. The officer's face flushed deep red. This is because of cameras. No, the sergeant said evenly. It's because of conduct. Marcus felt no joy. Just wait. The officer looked at him again. Something defensive flickered there. Then something smaller. Fear. You think this ends well for you? The officer muttered. Marcus answered calmly. It already did. The sergeant gestured toward the building. Turn in your badge. The officer didn't move at first. Then slowly, he unclipped it. And the cameras caught everything. The video leaked 3 days later. No warning. No statement first. Just a clip. 47 minutes long. Unedited. The headline read, City contractor detained by officer now under review. Marcus sat alone in his office when Denise sent the link. Have you seen this? She texted. He hadn't. He closed the door. Pressed play. The screen showed the side of his van. The officer's voice came first. What are you delivering in a neighborhood like that? Marcus watched himself answer. Calm. Careful. The body cam caught everything. The pause after his address. The tone shift. You borrow this van? Then the line. You people always find creative ways to look legitimate. Marcus paused the video. He stared at the screen. He remembered the heat in his neck. The silence after those words. He pressed play again. The camera moved when the cuffs clicked. The officer's breathing got louder. The crowd's voices faint. Then his own voice. Officer, what exactly is the problem? The officer's reply was quieter. The problem is I don't believe you belong here. Marcus stopped the video again. Belong. That word again. He leaned back in his chair. His hands rested on the desk. Still. Steady. His phone buzzed. Unknown numbers. Messages. Emails. Support. Anger. Threats. Denise knocked softly and stepped in. It's everywhere, she said. I know. National pickup. He nodded. The video resumed in the background. The part where the officer said, You had attitude. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Attitude. He remembered standing still. Hands open. Voice level. He didn't shout. He didn't insult. He asked questions. Denise sat across from him. You don't have to watch it alone. He gave a small nod. I need to. The video reached the station scene. The moment the database confirmed ownership. The pause on the officer's face. Tiny, but visible. Social media froze that frame. looped it, analyzed it. Commentators replayed his words. His presence in a high-value neighborhood raised concern. Raised concern. Marcus exhaled slowly. Concern about what? The answer was clear now. The public could see it. No slurs. No violence. Just doubt. Just assumption. Just pressure. The reporter's question echoed in the clip. Concern based on what factor? Silence filled the screen. That silence was louder than anything else. Denise looked at him carefully. How do you feel? Marcus searched for the word. Exposed. She nodded. That's fair. Not powerful, he added. Exposed. Outside the office window, two drivers were talking quietly. One glanced up at him. Respect in her eyes. But also worry. Marcus's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown sender. You should have just cooperated. He deleted it. Denise saw his face change. Threat. Small one. We expected that. He nodded. This isn't just about him, Denise said softly. No. It's bigger. Marcus looked back at the screen. The final moment of the video played. The badge unclipping. The officer's voice tight. You think this ends well for you? Marcus remembered his answer. It already did. Online, people debated that line. Some called it brave. Some called it staged. He knew the truth. It hadn't felt brave. It had felt necessary. Denise stood slowly. The department issued a statement. What does it say? Administrative review ongoing. Commitment to transparency. Marcus gave a faint, tired smile. Transparency came from a leak. She didn't argue. His phone buzzed again. This time, a message from the city council office. Meeting request. Urgent. Denise read over his shoulder. That's fast. Marcus stared at the notification. Public pressure was rising. Sponsors were asking questions. The department was quiet. Too quiet. He looked at the paused image on his screen. The officer's face frozen mid-sentence. Control slipping. Marcus closed the laptop gently. Set the meeting, he said. Denise nodded. As she left, he sat alone again. The room felt quiet. But not peaceful. Justice was moving. Slow. Careful. But outside, the conversation was only getting louder. And the department hadn't made its final decision yet. The city council chamber was full. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just full. Cameras lined the back wall. Community members filled the seats. Drivers from Reed Logistics sat together in the second row. Marcus sat at the front table beside Denise and the two attorneys. Across from them, police leadership. The chief cleared his throat. We are here regarding the internal investigation into Officer Daniel Hayes. The name sounded smaller now. The chief continued. The review included body camera footage, witness accounts, and departmental policy analysis. Marcus kept his eyes forward, hands folded. Calm. The chief's voice remained measured. The findings indicate violations of conduct standards, improper detention procedures, and biased language inconsistent with department values. A quiet murmur moved through the room. The chief did not look up. As of this morning, Officer Hayes has been formally terminated. The word landed softly, but it carried weight. Terminated. Denise exhaled beside Marcus. One of the drivers wiped her eyes. Marcus didn't react outwardly. Inside, something shifted. Not relief. Not celebration. Something quieter. The chief continued. Additionally, mandatory bias review training and procedural reforms will be implemented department-wide. Marcus listened carefully. Policy changes. Review boards. Oversight expansion. Words that meant systems were being touched. The chief looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Reed, the department extends a formal apology. The room grew still. Marcus stood slowly. Microphones adjusted. He did not rush. I accept the apology, he said evenly. But I did not need an apology to know who I am. Silence. He continued. I needed acknowledgement that I was treated as suspicious before I was treated as human. A few heads nodded. I built my company in this city. I hire in this city. I pay taxes in this city. His voice stayed calm. I should not need proof of belonging. The words were simple. Clear. No anger. Just truth. The chief nodded once. We understand. Marcus looked around the chamber. At his drivers. At the older man with the gray beard sitting near the aisle. At the reporter in the back row. The story had traveled far. But the feeling was still close. Personal. He stepped back from the microphone. The meeting adjourned. Outside, sunlight hit the steps of City Hall. Reporters gathered again. Mr. Reed, do you feel justice was served? He paused. Carefully. Accountability was served, he said. Justice is slower. The reporter tilted her head. What do you mean? Marcus glanced toward the drivers behind him. They still saw their employer in handcuffs. The statement hung heavy. That doesn't disappear because someone lost a job. Denise stood beside him. You're going back to work? She asked quietly. Yes. Today? Yes. They walked down the steps together. No celebration. No cheering. Just movement. Across the street, one of the fleet vans waited. Van 14. Returned that morning. Marcus walked toward it. He paused by the driver's door. His reflection stared back at him in the window. Same face. Same steady eyes. But something had changed. He opened the door. Sat behind the wheel. Hands resting on it. Just like that morning. The engine started smoothly. Drivers in other vans started theirs too. One by one. Quiet. Professional. Ready. Denise leaned into the open window. You don't have to drive routes yourself anymore. He gave a faint smile. I know. Then why? He looked ahead. Because he loved the work. Because leadership meant presence. Because fear should not redesign his life. Because I belong here, he said softly. She nodded. The vans pulled out together. Not in protest. Not in defiance. In routine. Normal routine. The kind that builds cities quietly. As Marcus drove through Crest Hill again, lawns looked the same. Houses unchanged. But this time, no siren. No lights. Just motion. He stopped at the first delivery. Stepped out. Package in hand. A woman opened the door. She hesitated for half a second. Then smiled politely. Thank you. He nodded once. You're welcome. Simple exchange. Ordinary. And somehow heavier than before. When he returned to the van, he paused. Looked down the quiet street. He had been told he did not belong here. Now the street was silent. Not welcoming. Not hostile. Just still. Marcus climbed back into the driver's seat. Closed the door gently. And drove forward. Not because the world had changed completely. But because he had refused to shrink inside it. The city moved on. The cameras moved on. The headlines shifted. But the memory stayed. And so did the lesson. Belonging is not granted. It is lived. And Marcus Reed was not going anywhere.